sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
Welcome to Rabbi on the Sidelines. I'm Rabbi Sherman from Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, and we speak about the intersection of sports and faith. This week, we are joined by one of my good friends, a longtime friend when I was a student at Columbia University, Maiya Edelson. Maiya played softball at Columbia University, pitched a no-hitter coming up on an anniversary on April 2nd. She was part of the Israeli national team of softball, played in the Maccabiah games. She left Columbia as second in triples, third in runs scored, single season hits record. Now the director of Hillel at the University of Texas for the Longhorns. Maiya, it is so good to see you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on as a guest.
This is pretty amazing, and I just want to share the story to begin because people asked me how I took my sports passion and put it into the faith world. And really, it began with you so many years ago when I was a religious school teacher at SAJ, Society of Advancement of Judaism, on 86th Street, and was it West End? No, the other side. And I decided to teach a sports elective to second graders. And I said, well, let's bring in a true Jewish sports hero. And it was you, not Maiya Edelson, but back then, Maya Shard Yaron. And you came in your Columbia University softball uniform. I just remember the kids wide-eyed saying, wow, like we can be Jewish and proud of our Jewishness and also be on the baseball and softball field and be proud of being Jewish there as well. So it's great to see you. And let's start actually on the Jewish side. We'll go to the sports side, and then we'll do a little mix and match.
Great.
Your faith journey actually didn't just start from you as a youth, but you had a lot of influences in your life. And one of those being your grandfather of blessed memory, Rabbi Stanley Rabinowitz. Let me just tell us a little bit about your grandfather, the impact he had, not just on you, but the Jewish world, and how you took that inspiration to bring Jewish identity into your life as well.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. That's where we're starting. My grandfather, who passed away now just about 10 years ago, but he was a rabbi at Addis Israel congregation in Washington, D.C. So in our nation's capital during some of the most formative decades of what was going on in our country in activism in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. And, he actually retired from the pulpit when I was a toddler. So I don't remember him really being up there in the pulpit. I remember him more in his retirement where he was still active, writing and speaking and teaching and doing all sorts of stuff with the Jewish community. But I have lived with, meeting people on whom he had such a great impact. The synagogue there and being in DC, he had the chance to interact with some amazing, prolific leaders, both from Israel and in the US. And I think when I think about my own leadership journey, he's a huge influence. And I think a few of the qualities that have really stuck with me, one, he was an important guy. He commanded respect, but he was so approachable. He was a fun person. And I think that really sticks with me also in thinking about a leadership presence. And I think also, a lot, obviously he was in the synagogue. He was very passionate about prayer and about people engaging with their Judaism and text study. And he also was really about Jewish peoplehood. And I think that's something that stuck with me in my own Jewish identity, was thinking about, Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people, about connection to the land and the state of Israel as being really primary parts of Jewish identity. And that was very important to him. And I think, for his time, of course, everything's based on what time you're in, he was very creative and innovative in how he approached Judaism in a lot of ways. And I only came to appreciate that as an adult when I started my journey at JTS and becoming a Jewish educator, and really appreciated some of the, I don't want to say risks, but some of the chances he took on being innovative in the synagogue. And I think that's something that's really inspirational for me too. I think above all, though, he was a family man. He was a wonderful Saba, grandfather. He loved doing magic tricks. He went fishing with his brothers. He loved all of that. And that's also really an important part of being a leader, is taking care of those who are closest to you around you.
Is there some innovation that you saw that you're either proud of or sort of brought into your experience as a Jewish leader? Something that maybe we do today that we didn't know that he really brought?
There's a few. I mean, one I would say he was one of the early rabbis doing bat mitzvahs for girls in the synagogue.
100-year anniversary just a couple of weeks ago.
Exactly. And Mordecai Kaplan was one of his teachers at JTS, and someone he was very, very close with. He actually had written correspondence with for years after he graduated. But think the way he approached women in Jewish life and egalitarianism was really ahead of his time, and it's not something that I certainly take for granted. So I think that's one example.
It's fascinating that you say that, because I remember you as a student with me at Hillel on the 5th floor of the Craft Center, where I believe you might be right now, and Koach and the conservative movement. And you were so passionate about your Judaism there. I first knew you as a fellow student, and then actually as an athlete, and then I was even more wowed. So let's go back to San Diego. You actually grew up thousands of miles apart from your grandfather, but obviously had a very deep influence. What was your first, let's go to the Jewish life. What was your Jewish life growing up in San Diego? And then we'll talk about the field.
Sure. So San Diego, my parents moved there actually from Israel. My mom grew up in Washington, D.C. But I sort of grew up with that blend of having a conservative rabbinic grandfather and having a kibbutznik background on the other side, and a blend of those two. I was fortunate to go to a wonderful Jewish day school through 8th grade, which gave me a great foundation, I think, in Jewish life and learning, along with what I got at home. San Diego is an amazing community. So I think, we'll get back into this. I also, I went to Jewish summer camp for a couple years and loved it. But then I was playing softball competitively year time and travel. And there came the point I had to make a decision. You really can't go to sleepaway camp, Jewish sleepaway camp, and be on the travel ball circuit for softball and hope to get recruited. And I had to make some choices. And I ended up playing on, going the softball route. But it came full circle, because later on as a college student, I went back to camp to work. And so that was an important decision. But yeah, it's a little bit about my background.
So let's talk about softball. When did you realize that was, if you wish, your sport of choice? Nowadays, people are not necessarily diversifying their sports, right? They do one all season long. What was your sports journey, and when did you realize that you loved it more than just, a recreational activity on a Tuesday?
Yeah. I'm such a believer. I listen to a lot of podcasts about softball specifically, and they talk all about the skills you get from playing other sports and how it actually can feed into your main sport with different skill sets and, training different reactions and this and that. And I totally buy into that, but I was a horrible example of that, because when I was really little, I started playing softball when I was 8. Honestly, my friend's mom called my mom and said, Rebecca's going to go out for the softball league. Does Maiya want to join? And, I was tinkering with soccer a little bit, and I liked PE in school. I liked running. I liked sprints. And I was like, sure, I'll try a new sport. And my friend quit after 1 year, and I stuck around for another 25. So I liked it. My mom, who will say that will joke she's pre-Title IX and never had the opportunity to play, she was always a baseball fan. My dad, and this will come full circle, being from Israel, didn't have a lot of exposure to baseball and softball, but I think, I fell in love with it. And that's when I was 8 years old. When I was 12, I started playing year round on a travel team. And it was a different caliber. It was a whole different world, seeing that people really dedicated their lives, that parents made a lot of sacrifice financially, getting on the road, driving to these crazy places every weekend. I did, I played volleyball in middle school and then early high school. I did gymnastics a little bit, but by the time I was certainly a freshman, I decided I stopped with volleyball and I was doing softball year round. I think, if at any point I'd wanted to take a step back, I could have. I was really, my family would have been supportive on that, but thankfully I didn't burn out. I really loved it, and it kept me going. So, yeah.
And then when did you realize that you could take this to the next level? And when you realized that, you traveled across the country to an Ivy League institution, which not necessarily the powerhouse of sports, as you and I have probably attended many different athletic events, but you made that decision. Was it a Jewish faith decision? Was it strictly athletics? How did that work?
So Columbia was picked in the Ivy League preseason poll to finish number 1 this year. So we'll see how that goes. They won last night. So, but that's a good point. I started playing what we call travel ball, year-round club softball, which in Southern California, you can play all year.
Yes.
The world has now changed with parity and geography, and I can kind of get into that. But in Southern California, there's an elite softball field on every corner. We had amazing training facilities, which I came to appreciate more when I played in Israel. So I'll talk about that. But by the time I was in 10th grade, I realized I think I'm going to have opportunities to play Division I, and that's what I want. I'm blessed that I was in a family where it was expected I would go to college. I mean, there are some people who this was how they were going to get to college, or this was the path there. I said, I know the plan is for me to go to college, but I love this sport, and I'm starting to see I'm in the company of people who will be playing at that next level, and that is what I want. So then, there was the conversation and to sit down with the list of who had a softball program that was a good fit, that was competitive, that was the kind of place I wanted to play, had a coach whose philosophy I really liked, high academics, and had a strong Jewish population. And that was on my list. And I'll tell you, I got some recruiting interest from some really great schools with wonderful coaches, but it didn't have the Jewish community that I was looking for. And that for me, even in high school, was a priority. And I had some really nice conversations with them and said, I don't think this is going to be the right fit. So that was what I was looking at. For a San Diego kid to leave California, I really wanted to go to a big city. And my recruiting trips were mostly in kind of large urban areas. And I actually fell in love with Columbia, where I am sitting today, because I'm here in New York for a work event tonight, when touring with my high school, separate from softball. And we walked out to campus, and it was this beautiful sunny day, and everyone's out, lounging, playing Frisbee. And it's not like that every day here. But I fell in love with it. And I said, I wonder how their softball team is. And they had actually just kind of built it a few years before. And it went from there, where I was in touch with the coaches, and they came out during recruiting tournaments. And I came here on one of my visits, and it really had all the elements I was looking for. I'll say when I came on my recruiting trip to Columbia, as I visited other schools, which were great and had some of those other components, I observed a practice, and I watched. These are players who took the sport seriously, and they were working hard. They were encouraging each other. They were putting their head down and going. They also were talking about things going on in the world and issues beyond softball, like when they were walking to the locker room or whatever. It's obviously a great school, and I knew New York City, Columbia, this was going to be an amazing Jewish community. So for me, it all came together there.
I mean, for those of you who don't know, there's no baseball field on campus either, right? This is not like walking out of your dorm and playing on a field. There was a schlep. It was a schlep up to.
Yeah, there's a beautiful facility. Those in New York, you should definitely go check it out. 218th Street and Broadway, so the very northern tip of Manhattan. It's called Baker Field, and that's where the football stadium, baseball, softball, field hockey, soccer, crew, tennis, all those sports are up there.
So then you get to campus, and we find you in the Hillel every Shabbat, really blending this idea of sports and faith. As you mentioned, the first bar mitzvah, I remember actually also you're wearing the talit and really being fully egalitarian and modeling that for so many people as well. How did you balance that? When did you say, you know what, hey, softball teammates, I can't come to the softball party because I actually have to go daven? What did that look like? And how did that either influence or inspire or educate your classmates who didn't know what Hillel was on 115th Street?
That exact intersection defined so much of my college experience, in addition to classes, which were great, and I love school and whatever, but that was it. Because I'll tell you, and you might not know this, Erez, is a San Diego kid coming to New York City, going to their first Shabbat. Okay, I'm going to walk in. I've always been involved in the Jewish community. I'm a student athlete. I had a hard time at first because I'm not from this area. A lot of people went to camp together, did youth group, and I didn't do those things because I was traveling around playing softball 1 million hours a month. And I did have a moment where I actually took a step back and said, this might not work out how I thought it was going to. Wow. Maybe it's not for me to be super involved in the Jewish community. And I also, to be honest, I was like, yeah, I'm on the softball team. I have a great group of teammates. I have a built-in friend kind of social component here. I'm up at 5 a.m. going to practice every day. Maybe I should just focus on that. And I had a few weeks. That was sort of my mindset. And then it was Sukkot my freshman year in the fall. I remember seeing some students like leaving Hillel with their lulav and etrog for the holiday and feeling this ping in my stomach. And I said, this has always been really important to me. I got to figure this out. We got to figure out how it's going to work. It was actually a staff member here at the Hillel who connected me with a senior who was on the fencing team, who was Jewish and involved with Hillel. And then she kind of opened up a lot of doors. And I just decided to own it and say, I'm going to find a way to be involved in the Jewish community on my own terms in a way that works for my schedule and works for what's comfortable for me. And also be really involved in the student athlete community. I was a captain my last 2 years. That was always going to be my primary commitment outside of school and my health and family. Like softball had to take precedence. I couldn't run for student leadership positions in Hillel because I was here to play and go to school. So, but I found a way to make it work. And I think it taught me a lot of skills of exactly what you're saying of, hey, I'm going to, go to practice on a Saturday morning and then come home and shower. And then I got invited out to a Shabbat lunch, and that's going to work for me this week. Or, Friday night, yeah, people are out, but I'm going to go to Hillel for services and see my friends. And then I might, go to bed early because we had a doubleheader the next day.
Right.
So I just found ways to kind of plug it in and make it work. And that whole navigating that was like a really big part of developing who I am Jewishly today, I think.
It's interesting because you're sort of a pioneer in that field. I'll take Tamir Goodman as an example, a good friend of mine, the good friends of this show. He was on last year, and he took it one way, right? Obviously to Maryland and then to Towson, and then really just doing amazing things with Jews in sports in the state of Israel and bringing people to Israel. And then you have a kid like Ryan Terrell at Yeshiva University, who's a junior and declares for the NBA draft. Yeah. And Coach Steinmetz's son, I think Jacob Steinmetz, who's now drafted by the Major League Baseball. These are Jewishly observant kids who are saying, we don't have to do it just in the Jewish world, but we can actually do both. What's your feeling of how that's going today and where you see going in the future in terms of really balancing that faith in sports?
I hope we're in a good place. I'll tell you, I taught Hebrew school here in New York City when I was, after college, when I was in grad school, and I had a student, 5th grade, who got selected for like this competitive swim program, and she was going to have to maybe miss Hebrew school or change the schedule. And I remember hearing people be like, where's their family's priorities? And I stopped and I said, this is a kid who's like really talented and something she loves. And let's celebrate it as a Jewish community. Let's work with that family to figure out like how they obviously care, like let's figure out how we're going to do it. And I hope we're in a place where that's really supported, where like, and I see this all the time with my students on campus, but people have passions and skills, and that might be sports. And if Judaism is going to grate against that, then they're going to push away Judaism. And so how do we support people and being able to find that balance? And I think there's been a lot of creative outlets for that. Like we're seeing it, we'll talk about, I'm sure, Israel baseball and all that, but like the National Hillel basketball tournament, which started at Maryland Hillel, and the students who were involved in that. All these articles, right, about the YU basketball team. And it's just, I think it's being talked about more that like, this is, the old joke, which I know this show does not approve of, about Jews in sports. Like, it's like, no, like this is not how it has to be. It's not actually how it is. So let's keep telling these stories.
Absolutely. And so let's go to Israel for a few moments. And softball brings you to Israel. You spoke about your dual citizenship. Was that the reason why you were able to do it? Was it because you were the law of return? And actually, I believe you're one of the founding members of the Israeli national softball team. So let's talk about that. I know, with the Israeli baseball team, this was way before Israel was in the Olympics over this past summer. We had Peter Kurtz on the show a couple of months ago. We had Ty Kelly. Baseball is becoming popular, but let's talk about softball in the land of Israel.
Awesome. So that's exactly it. I have dual citizenship from birth. Both my parents are actually Israeli citizens. So again, I'm growing up in Southern California. I'm playing softball. I used to go to Israel maybe every other summer with my family to see family. Never had any idea that there was softball there. Like never. And then my freshman year of college at Columbia, so I'm 18 years old, someone knew someone who said there's this pitcher at Columbia who's Israeli, and we're trying to build a women's fast pitch team, and someone should find a way to call her. So again, they call my mom. They saw all these things happen. Do you want to go to Italy this summer and play for the Israeli national softball team we're trying to build? Okay, yeah, of course. And so that was 2003. And we went to the European Championships in Saronno, Italy, near Milan. And at the time, and we can talk more about where the program is now, but because I had dual citizenship, I was able to play because you have to have a passport. And, that whole experience, again, made me really appreciate what I grew up with and the access to training and facilities and resources that you take for granted. And I actually have thought about a lot if maybe that experience is one of the reasons I never burned out on softball, because playing in Israel refreshed my passion and appreciation for what I had, which makes you, just think differently about everything. And in those early years, I want to shout out my friend Shayela Mike, who actually lives in New Jersey now, but she was also dual citizen. She had made Aliyah. She was a few years ahead of me. She played at Quinnipiac University in Connecticut. And when she was living in Israel, she was an umpire. I think there was women's slow pitch and there was men's fast pitch. And she said, let's build women's fast pitch. Let's do it. And she got it going. I mean, from the ground up. And she was also a pitcher. So she and I pitched together. We were the two primary pitchers on that team for a decade.
Wow.
And it was really grassroots. I mean, we're talking about teaching people the sport from the start. We're talking about taking athletes who were successful in other sports and had interest in softball, wanted to learn more, and trying to help them develop the skill set. And that first summer in 2003 was not pretty. You know, we went to European Championships. You're talking about teams like Italy and the Netherlands that have huge infrastructure and professional leagues. And it was a big learning experience. We did get our first win over Bulgaria, which I'll never forget. And I still have a photo from the scoreboard.
Oh, wow.
But then fast forward to 2007, just 4 years later, we finished fourth in the tournament. There was then like an A pool and a B pool, but we came through and we're beating teams that we never would have beaten 4 years earlier. And we did it mostly with players who had pretty limited exposure. It was me, Shayela, and Jen Jacoby actually played at Rutgers and was also a dual citizen. And the three of us, you know, would come over. And it really was so gratifying to build from the ground up. And, you know, obviously the program's developed, but I'll never forget, if you think about the intersection, we're talking about Judaism. And again, I've been in Israel a lot, but going back to that first summer, 2003, I stayed with my aunt and uncle in Herzliya while I was there training. So, you know, I'm in college and took time over the summer. And Ami Baran, who's the head of Israel softball, he gave me a ride to my very first practice. So he came to pick me up and he said, you know, I can give you a ride home, but I have a game. He plays in the men's fast pitch league. He's a storied pitcher. He's like, I have a game after, so you have to just wait for the game to be done and then I'll drive you home. Okay, sure. I need a ride, right? So we have practice and like our coach is Argentinian. People are speaking English, Hebrew, Spanish. You know, this whole, I'm like, what's my role here? How are they going to accept me? I'm an 18-year-old like American kid coming in with, you know, a certain background. So we have the practice, which was like an incredible eye-opening experience. And then I stay for this game. And I watched this men's fast pitch game in Israel at the Baptist Village, which is where the best field in Israel is. And I looked around and I had never experienced something like that, where you had the men's league had been around for a long time. You had really competitive men's fast pitch softball in Israel. And people are like every walk of life, immigrants, you know, native born Sabras. And I want to say for the first time in my life, it was like the two parts of myself came together.
Wow.
It was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And that's what really kept me motivated through those years where like, it wasn't always easy figuring out logistics and the finances and, you know, some growing pains of building a sport. And we thankfully had some success again a few years later. And I'm really proud of what we built. And then, you know, kind of fast forward 2013. So I was like 28 and just life was such that I think I felt it was time to take a step back. And could I have still played? Probably yes. But, you know, I was far away. I was doing different stuff for my career and I respect the game too much to say, like, I don't know if I can keep up the level of training, especially for pitching. That would really be needed to succeed. And it's time for the next era to come in. So I took a step back after that.
Actually, that experience that you just talked about at the men's game, sitting there and all that coming together reminds me exactly what you said earlier about your grandfather and Jewish peoplehood. And there's so many different ways of bringing Jewish peoplehood together that it's not just in the sanctuary. As Seth Greenberg, who coached in the Maccabiah games, who's now on ESPN, as he said, the locker room is our sanctuary. And it's so true in terms of bringing those people together. As you said, the different languages. The universal language was softball, but it actually was in the land of Israel. And then you also, I believe, played in the Maccabiah games as well. What was that experience like? Who did you play for? And this year, the Maccabiah games are coming back, and I just spoke with Eyal Tiberger, who's the CEO of Maccabi World Union. He said there's over 15,000 athletes, the largest Maccabiah game ever coming now. What was that experience like now sort of being in the Jewish Olympics, and who were you representing at that moment?
Awesome. So yes, I was very fortunate. I was in 3 Maccabiah games, 05, 09, and 2013. And then we also went to the Pan American Games in 2008 in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. And I played for Israel, which was funny because I got the call to come try out for Maccabi USA. And of course, and they were super good and it was very tempting. But like the things would be the same summer. So we'd have the Maccabiah and then the European Championships usually. I think once it was flipped and we went to the Europeans at first. But I was like, I'm not going to abandon my team. Like, I'm here to help build a sport in Israel. I could go play for Maccabi USA, but I'm going to stay with Israel. And it was great for us to be able to have the Maccabiah as a training ground for the European Championships because it was a way we could get good games in. And very different experience, right? Maccabiah, again, Jewish athletes, that people who had experienced European Championships, you're there representing Israel, which is also very, very powerful. but totally different. And
Actually, talk about that for a second. Representing
yeah,
Israel in Europe.
yeah.
Today, it's a little different experience in terms of the anti-Semitism. We've talked to a lot of the Israeli baseball players, what that's like. Did you face any either anti-Semitism, or did you sort of find Jews in Europe coming out saying, you know what, I'm so proud of you and this is who I am? What did that look like?
I think we were conscious even then of anti-Semitism. Like, I'll be honest, usually one of the last practices before we left for Europe, we'd have a security consultant, come and give us some framing instructions of like how to behave when we were in Europe, meaning when you're out on the town for dinner, they encourage us to speak in English, not Hebrew.
Wow.
Not wearing, like, it was so interesting. Like, we'd go to the airport, we're traveling, usually wear like your team gear. We weren't supposed to wear anything that said Israel. We just wore regular street clothes. And the irony of that is, at the tournaments, people like to trade stuff, like trade at the closing ceremonies. So I remember we were leaving one year and we're at the airport to fly back to Israel. And there was other teams wearing our Israel softball shirts because we traded for them. They thought they were super cool. And we're like, that's funny. They're wearing them and we're not, because we're not supposed to. So we were very conscious of it. I don't honestly remember explicit anti-Semitism ever coming into it. And I actually think that's what's really beautiful is we got to know. We really do. I mean, a lot of times you're at the same hotel, you're around the field all day together.
Right.
You get to know a lot of the other teams, and people were just connecting people to people through a sport we love. And there were teams, from Denmark. We were very good friends with the Croatian team. There was a lot of great friendships built there. A lot of them came to visit Israel. And there was a lot of pride. There's an opening ceremony and we're walking with the flag. We're singing before every game. They play the national anthems of both countries. And there's a huge amount of pride. We played Poland, we played Germany, we played Russia, we played Ukraine. And there was an amazing experience also. We played a team from Slovenia, and they actually had a Jewish player on the team who ended up coming to train with us and play with us a little bit in Israel also. And she's very proud of her Jewish identity. And she was like the best player in the Slovenian team. So that was a really cool experience. But it definitely, I think it was much more about people-to-people connections. Politics at that time really did not come up a lot, but we were always very conscious of security because we needed to be.
And so back to the Maccabiah games, what was that like representing Israel as an American in Israel against other Jews, not against other Jews, but with other Jews?
I mean, it was great. First of all, I have to say I was really happy that our Israeli team got to see Maccabi USA and the level of play. Like, what does it look like? Most of the Maccabi USA players were college, U.S. college softball players, D1 through D3, some awesome players. I became friends with some of them, which was fun. But I was glad actually our team got to see what does that look like? What does team culture look like? It was a good experience for them. And it was great. I mean, there's something really special about hosting it literally on your home turf. And I think, I had that dual lens, especially like 2009 and 2013. I was already working in the Jewish community of also understanding this isn't just about the sports. This is about identity and seeing that happen. It was funny because you can see it happen for the non-Israeli athletes, for the Americans and others. But I even saw it for my Israeli teammates of like, wow, this is so cool that Jews from around the world are coming. And that, again, there's a lot of camaraderie. The women's tournament was smaller because it was still a building sport. So we usually had Canada, Argentina, US, us. But the men's tournament was quite large, and a lot of teams from South America and Mexico was always a big presence. And so it was very festive in the softball tournament, and some of my best memories. And again, as you said before, it's people who are Jewish, who are connecting with Jewish peoplehood over a sport we love. And that is something you can't find anywhere else. So
I want to go back to Columbia one more time because you're well known in the history of Columbia University for pitching a seven inning no hitter. April 2nd, 2006, coming up on that anniversary. I can't believe how many years ago it was. Take us through that moment. Like, when did you realize that this was in process? You see in the majors that they sort of put the pitcher over there, they don't talk to them. what was that like, and what was that either last strike or last out like?
Awesome. I remember it very clearly. I can't believe, you're right, it's anniversary. And there've been other no-hitters since then for Columbia pitchers, which is very great.
You were the first.
So one of my favorite parts of that memory. So first of all, it was my senior year. And in Israel, I pitched and played center field. And that's what I did. I pitched growing up. When I came to Columbia, I really was a utility player, which I loved. I love being a utility player now and things I do. Because I was pretty much the everyday starter and left, in the beginning. I pitched here and there my first 3 years, but my team needed me more in the outfield. I played a little first base. And then senior year, we had some personnel changes in our roster. And my coach was like, Maiya, we're going to need you to pitch a lot more this year. I'm like, okay. I'm pitching. Thank goodness. I'm pitching in Israel every summer. I've stayed up on it.
The autonomy of Columbia University right here.
But what's interesting about that no-hitter was the day before we also had a doubleheader against a different team, and I pitched horribly. I had like such a bad game. I got totally knocked around, and our pitching coach, Jen Smith Wernicke, pulled me aside and like had a conversation with me, and we actually talked about mental preparation. We talked about some physical cues, staying long and loose. And it's funny with pitching because I feel like, especially for me hitting and when like I'm in the outfield, I use a lot of energy. Like I like to get hyped up and you stay focused. And for me pitching, like you have to stay really relaxed. The more relaxed my muscles were, the longer my motion was, the more my ball moved, which was my bread and butter, was movement. And we came out that Sunday morning and I'm back in the circle a day after really getting shelled. And it was great, an amazing game, and I was hitting my spots and everything's kind of clicking. And I remember, it's funny how clearly I remember it, but I remember, my ball was moving. And 2 runners got on a walk. One got erased on a double play, third base, Casey Chrisman. We turned a double play, and the other one got caught stealing. So really, we kind of flew through the game, and you can't let the moment be bigger than you, right? Because the minute you get really excited, you're going to lose your mechanics. So I just remember breathing long and loose. No one talked about it. And then the last inning, there's a great Sandy Koufax quote. I don't have exactly in front of me, but no, it's not Sandy Koufax, but I guess it's from Bull Durham. But like strikeouts are boring. Strikeouts are great, but like strikeouts are boring. It's more fun when you get your defense involved. And that was especially in my college pitching. There were moments like in Israel and other times in high school, it was more of a dominant strikeout pitcher, but pitching in D1 at Columbia, like I needed to focus on movement and getting ground balls. And that was that whole game. Ground ball, ground ball, ground ball. Last inning, ground ball to second base, Hillary Parsons. Next batter, ground ball back to me. And then we're 1 out away. And then I remember it's like it's yesterday, a little floater right over the shortstop into that no man's land in left field. And I'm like, it's going to drop. And Kelly Leong, our shortstop, got it out of nowhere. And that was the game. And then you can kind of let the excitement happen. And here's a fun story you'll like. It was a Saturday game. And later that night, I got home. We took a shower in the locker room. I get home. And I think I went by Hillel. And it was like Havdalah on the end of Shabbat. And a couple friends knew I had thrown a no-hitter, and they announced it at the end of services.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Which was really cool. I was like, oh, that's so fun. I'm like, it's like the Kiddush announcements, but
yeah,
they're like, it's a no-hitter. So
actually, I remember in Craft Center down on the 5th floor with Sudash Lishit, we're talking about Jewish peoplehood, right? That was like the time that literally everybody would come, Reform, Orthodox, Conservative, Reconstructionist. It didn't matter who you were, you would sit in that circle, and you were in that circle. I was in that circle. So many of our friends were in that circle, and it actually is a moment that I'll never forget. Yes, no-hitter Kiddush announcements, absolutely. So then you go into the Jewish leadership field. I actually thought you were going to go into the rabbinic field, but you've influenced so many future rabbis in what you've done, and you go into the Hillel world. Why did you choose that world? Tell us a little about the Hillel world that you entered into, which was about 15 years ago, and maybe how you've seen that shift pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. And then we have a little video I'm going to share with you that about what your leadership style is.
Awesome. Okay. I really chose Hillel after college. I decided not to go to rabbinical school. It wasn't the path I wanted. I did a master's at JTS in experiential education. 2009. Those who remember, it was a tough time to be looking for a job. But I said, what are the places that had the deepest impact on me? And that was summer camp and Hillel. And I said, I want to work in one of those two. And I ended up working Hillel at UC Davis in Northern California. And for
Rabbi Louis Sachs.
Yes, he was one of my students.
Of your students, yes.
Yeah, it's great. So I was at Davis, Maryland, and now I'm at UT. But there's something really dynamic about being on a college campus. It's fun. I mean, aside from the sports angle, which is actually a draw. Like I love it's fun being part of a campus culture where people are proud and where they go to school. And, there's a lot of good energy to get behind. But students are really fun. The journey they're going through in their time on campus is dynamic. And it's really exciting to think about being a big part of that, because I think about my own journey, as I described, that was huge for me. And so thinking about the lives we're able to impact. And also it's kind of fun, like students, I mean, it sounds bad. Students graduate, they move on. And then we get to stay in touch as alumni, which is awesome. But then you have new people come in with new ideas and new perspectives. And so it's always changing. And I think that makes it really exciting. And so that's one of the reasons I started with Hillel, and then I've stuck around, because no 2 days are the same. There was a really nice path to kind of move into different roles of increasing responsibility within Hillel. And so it's been a great professional home for me. And I think coming in, it's funny. I think about it now. I started my first year in Hillel was 2009 professionally. And, In some ways, students are similar. I mean, students are students. They're coming in, they're experiencing some of the same things. The world has certainly changed. I think technology has changed immensely. The way social media and phones and texting impact people's lives and relationships is pretty significant. And that's certainly changed dramatically. I think Hillel as a movement, and this was already happening 15 years ago, but there's really been an evolution that we need to be relevant to students where they are. It's not like we're not sitting there waiting for people to walk in our door and, okay, great, whoever shows up, shows up. We need to understand the campus culture. We need to understand what matters to students. Where are they physically, what's going on, and then figure out how the same way for me, being Jewish and being proud and being an athlete, it was important to find ways to combine those. Students have all sorts of identities. They're involved in a lot of things on campus. They're in their academic worlds. They're in different social networks and social circles, and we want to help them find a way to really embrace that. And I think that's what Hillel is doing now. We're not just sitting waiting for people to come to us on our own terms. And so I think that growing even more has been great. I think the pandemic, obviously different campuses were different, incredibly difficult for students, mostly learning online. Some of them had to stay at home. So many parts of your campus experience. You think about eating in the dining hall and going to parties and going to sporting events. So many of those things were taken away. And even as they're coming back, I think there's a real adjustment for students now. Academically, moving from online classes to back, like I have to walk across campus at 8 a.m. for my econ class and sit down and be there. And there's a great appreciation for what the in-person campus experience offers. And I think for us at Hillel, we're finding ways to help students, reinvigorate, reintegrate into what that campus is like. And also, in some ways, there's things that we did before programmatically that were kind of like, there's a different group of students. They don't all remember it. And so it could actually be, hey, let's try this different thing that we tried during COVID and actually worked. Or, we don't feel as bound to the way something was before. And at the same time, I think students, had 2 years where they just didn't have the normal pathways of campus life, and they're kind of refiguring it out too.
So we were on a little Zoom call a couple of years ago, or during the pandemic, with our friend Rabbi Jeremy Fine and your student, Zach Epstein, who's the brother of a friend of ours, Jory Epstein, the journalist for the Dallas Cowboys. And this is what you said, how you combine sports and faith in Hillel.
About Hillel, we want to be fully integrated into university life and campus life, and certainly at a place like Texas, sports is near the top of that list. I would say in the fall, we absolutely consider the football schedule. When we think about if we're doing, a big Shabbat program in a non-COVID year, we would never schedule it the weekend of the Texas OU game when everyone's going to Dallas, right? Because the game's played in Dallas every year. So we're very in tune with that. I think basketball less, so there's also more games, but it's something that we're really aware of, I'm actually hopeful for both the men's and women's programs that we're going to see some uptick in general fan support, student support. I think both programs are in a really great upward trajectory. And so, it is part of something we consider. And I also think as the Hillel director, it happens to be, I love sports, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be at this kind of campus. But I have season tickets for softball because that's my first love, as we all know. But I love going to games. I love knowing what's going on. I love hearing about the coaching changes and who the good players are, because it's also part of our campus life. It's what we talk about with students. It's what I talk about with alumni all the time. I think it definitely plays a role.
So I think it's exactly what you said, that you meet the students where they are. And obviously in a place like Texas, it's a big part of the culture. How do you do that? What does a game day look like? And is Hillel closed down, or do you actually integrate into that culture?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've tinkered with, having kosher tailgates on football days. We're not doing as much of that. I think it's more just in the everyday conversation, and again, just awareness, knowing what's going on. I want to actually shout, it's funny, Zach, who's on that call, used to be, he's now an alum of ours, used to be a practice player in the women's basketball team. One of his co-practice players, who's also Jewish, and in a Jewish fraternity, is a graduate manager for them now with the women's basketball team, who was just in the Elite Eight. I saw him on ESPN. It was really cool. But I think even, showing support for that and saying, this is awesome that you're part of our community and you're a really important part of this program that's bringing a lot of pride to our university. Is really great. I think, programmatically, there's a lot going on game day at UT. So we don't always want to compete with it. I don't know if we could throw the same kind of tailgate some of our friends in the neighborhood could throw at the fraternities and sororities. But but it's definitely just, again, embracing that that's part of what it means to be here, and having a lot of pride. The same way you have pride when you watch your team play a game, right. We have pride in our Jewish community. And I actually feel a lot of that ownership as the Hillel director, the same way the football coach is in charge of the football experience. Like, I feel like, all right, like I feel that kind of connection to the Jewish experience our students have, and I want it to be the best it can be.
So let's talk about that leadership experience. And this is from the Jewish Theological Seminary, where we were students together, and your idea of authenticity within leadership.
Leadership. One of the first words that comes to mind is authenticity. And I think especially being a leader of other people is not being afraid to roll up your sleeves and sort of really get in there and understand what the challenges people are facing, and showing a real authenticity in terms of your vision for leadership, your vision for that community and that institution.
So what does that mean, authenticity, in terms of being a leader? When they look up to you, when these students like Zach and Jory and all these kids that you're talking about, what do you want them to get from their experience by not just your words, but actually your actions?
It's a great question. And I'm thinking back to your first question about my grandfather and thinking about authenticity. Nice. And like, yeah, no, I mean, the same way, it's always been that way. Like, being an athlete and caring about being Jewish and just being true to who you are, and understanding sometimes it might be messy or it might not fit together perfectly, but you're going to do your best to make it work. And just being open about that, I think that's a big part of authentic leadership. And being like genuinely, like when we build relationships with students, we want to, like, we genuinely care about them. And I think you have to demonstrate that in how you listen, how you hear what they're saying, how you respond. And people pick up when someone's being inauthentic, when they're just like giving you the line or trying to sell you on a program, or, oh, I really just care about you coming here so we can, no, like I really care about your journey and what's important to you. We want to make this work. And I think it's all in how you approach your relationships with people. And I think also, when we think about Jewish community on campus, and just being really open with folks about what our goals are and what we're trying to accomplish. We have a really big Jewish community, and it's very diverse, and just, being able to tell our story in a very real way. So,
I want to talk about something that is important these days on the college campus, and that's Israel. So you talked about finding a Jewish community on campus. Even at Columbia University, there's been some anti-Israel sentiment within faculty and in the academics, not within the Jewish community, but actually what's happening within the classrooms. When the student's looking to be pro-Israel on campus, what does that look like in the Hillel environment? How have you guided students when they have faced those difficult issues, whether it's BDS or anti-Israel or now anti-Zionism, perhaps being anti-Semitism? What have you seen over the years that has changed, unfortunately, and how, I don't want to say combat it, but how can you be optimistic that you teach these young people, 18 years old, right, to be able to be advocates and to be able to be leaders for the state of Israel?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, we like to think in terms of Israel experience, engagement, and education, right? So a few things. One, I mean, as Hillel, part of our mission is inspiring students to create an enduring commitment to Jewish life learning in Israel. And the Israel piece to me means, like, we want every student to consider and think about what their relationship to Israel is. We're not going to prescribe us exactly what it looks like, or that they vote for a specific person, God forbid, or, but we want them to think about it as part of their identity. What does it mean? What is the significance of the land and the state of Israel for me and my Jewish experience, my Jewish identity? I think one of the most powerful ways we do that is by bringing students there. So obviously, we have Birthright Israel. We have a new Onward internship cohort that we're running over the summer, where people can go for 2 months, have a more immersive experience. We're doing things now with non-Jewish campus leaders, where we're bringing them to Israel. Hopefully now that COVID is winding down, this will all get back to normal. But going there and encouraging questions and encouraging conversations, and saying, open your eyes, ask the questions that you have, because we want to really engage in conversation with you, because we really think that's how you're going to be able to internalize what this means for you. And I'd rather that students come to us and ask tough questions than avoid it, or that say, oh, I can't go talk to them about that. But I think also, at Texas and many campuses have a Jewish Agency Israel Fellow, an emissary. And I think through that relationship building, going to coffee with someone who is from Israel, getting to know their story, getting to know their interests, helping show them around Austin when they come in, is also a huge part of it. Because again, if you're in you're building real relationships with people, it opens up better conversations than just yelling at each other, certainly.
Absolutely.
And I think, I think also with helping students find their voice, because it is something that we deal with, where students might experience an anti-Semitic or anti-Israel comment from a peer in classroom or in a student organization or something in the classroom. And our first approach is always to help them find the words to advocate for themselves and express what they're feeling, and to give them the resources to be able to do that with confidence, to be able to do the research they need, to have the facts and the information to really understand what they might be trying to say or want to say. And I think that that's also part of what we're helping them build while they're on campus, because they're going to go through life and have those experiences. And we want to be able to work with them so that they feel confident that they can engage with these topics and not shy away from it or not feel ashamed. Because I think that's really important.
So is there a moment or a couple of students that you can think of that maybe went to Israel for the first time through a birthright or through one of those programs that came back and was inspired to do action on campus?
All the time. All the time. I mean, I'm thinking about it. We have our first time in 3 years, our big Israel block party at UT is on Tuesday. It's a huge festival we're having right in the middle of campus, celebrating Israeli culture, history, diversity, lots of great stuff. But a lot of the students who come to volunteer and spend hours putting it together have come back from Israel and said, I want to bring this to campus. I want to learn more. So I think students really come back. And I think one of the best things, if they come back from something like a birthright trip and they want to have a deeper experience. Okay, now I want to go back and intern for a couple months, or I want to, I learned about this one city or sustainability or this one, social justice challenge, and I really want to learn more and I want to go back and dig deeper. To me, that's always, a success, because it's just the starting point.
Absolutely. So I want to play a little clip of what you did that I didn't realize that you do. I think more Hillel leaders need to do, and that's actually visit synagogues and welcome them to campus. This is actually from Texas, Houston, Texas, Congregation Beth Yeshurun, Rabbi Brian Strauss. And let's just take a look at this about the impact that you make within synagogue communities as well.
I was very blessed to go to the University of Texas. And when I look back at my life, I would say that one of the key reasons why I decided to become a rabbi was because of my experience at the Texas Hillel. And I feel very fortunate, and I'm very happy about the fact that Hillel, the University of Texas at Austin, has never been in better shape due to the work of many members of this congregation and other dedicated volunteers, lay leaders here in Houston and of course in Austin. And a major part of that credit goes to the terrific and extraordinary director of our University of Texas Hillel, Maiya Edelson. We are very blessed tonight to have.
So I'm a big fan of Rabbi Strauss. I'm a big fan of Maiya Edelson. And this question is actually for you to answer to me. What can we as rabbis do to strengthen the Hillel communities when our children, right, we're comfortable in our bubbles here in our synagogues and our religious schools and our day schools and our youth departments, but what can we do to help prepare them that when they do get to a college campus, it's absolutely on the top of their checklist to see if there is a Hillel, how strong it is, and really get them involved so that when they leave and become alumni, they can be a big influence in the Jewish world.
Awesome. That was a fun clip. We love Rabbi Strauss, and
I love Rabbi
Sherman
Strauss.
in Houston's a great place. We have a lot of students who come from there. A lot of our alumni are there. It's wonderful. So it was fun to visit them. That was for their college send-off Shabbat, which is an example where they invited me to come speak there because they were sending off their high school seniors who weren't just coming to UT. They're going all over. But the idea was helping to inspire them to think about Hillel and Jewish life on campus as they're getting ready for all the exciting things that come when you begin college. And I think it's a good question. I think the more communication that can happen, it's so funny. Our students tell the story. So if there's a synagogue rabbi who says, I got these high school sophomores, juniors, seniors, they're looking at campuses, they're making decisions. I can come talk. Our rabbi on staff at our Hillel can come talk to them, which is great, and they should. But if they see students who are a couple years ahead of them, who they see them, that's who they're going to be in a few years. And they come and say, hey, I do all this other stuff on campus. I'm in this social group. I study this. But Hillel's a really important part of my life. And here's what the difference it's made for me. It's introduced me to friends. It gives me a place when I'm a little bit homesick, I can go. It's given me this amazing leadership experience. I got set up with a mentor. And if they hear it from other students, I think it's 10 times more powerful. And we're so happy to help facilitate that. So I think building those connections where we can help some of our students go back into their communities and create bonds with those high schoolers as they're thinking about it. And I also think having good open communication, sometimes like you're in Los Angeles, you might have a student from your synagogue who's with us at UT, and maybe something's going on and we're here and we can be a resource. We can help. Their parents are far away, their home rabbi's far away, but we're here to help take care of them too. So I think helping that student feel that they have a place to go and they have people who are caring for them. And that might just be a phone call. That might just be, hey, can you help out with this? So I think building those strong connections is really important, but really helping the current students who are having the experience make sure that those up and coming high schoolers understand, what Hillel and being involved in Jewish life on campus can do for them.
So 2 last questions, one on the sports world, one on the faith world. In the Jews in sports world or faith in sports world, what do you see as sort of like the next iteration of the Brian Terrell, the Maiya Edelson, Tamir Goodman? What are we going to see? And really, actually, what is your message to the parent who I saw yesterday whose 3rd grade is playing softball and trying to balance a Jewish day school education with softball? Yeah. What should they be thinking about even now as a parent to be able to do both at a high level? That's question 1.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, I think there's so many more stories being told. Like, I feel like I go through my Twitter feed, reading all those great stories about the Yeshiva University basketball team. And I know they lost eventually, but reading some of the individual stories, the Israel baseball stuff. I'm trying to think of, I want more examples of women I'm trying to think of, but
talk about that for a second, actually. How can we empower young women in sports to really take it to the next level?
Well, there's a lot of questions, but I think telling those stories more, it's going to show kids and families that, wow, like I can support my kid in their sports journey. And it doesn't mean they're not going to care about Judaism. And the more stories that are being told, the more role models that are out there, and understanding it might look a little different. Look, playing sport at a high level requires a lot of sacrifice for anyone. Right. For anyone. Like, we're not going to joke, but also don't assume that just because someone does that they don't care about their Judaism or that they're never going to be able to care about it again. I'm thinking about, I used to not go to practice on Yom Kippur, and having that conversation was relatively comfortable for me because my background, but I've talked to a lot of other athletes who are very nervous about having that conversation with their coach and worried they're going to get cut, worried about this, but then they did it. And most of the time it goes okay, thankfully, and then they build that confidence that I can be who I am. But I think more of those stories being told is great. I think recognizing the positive benefits that come from playing sports, the physical benefits, the health benefits, certainly team sports, the character benefits, and thinking about how do you integrate Jewish values into those. And it's okay for kids to be involved in doing that. And then also making sure, that they're having a Jewish experience, but it doesn't have to be one or the other. Finding creative ways to have them both exist, because kids are smart and they're going to figure out a way that those can come together. And I think, we're seeing more of the Jewish sports camps kind of coming up and about around the country. And I think that's really positive. I think we're going to see a new generation coming out of those kinds of programs who, are playing maybe in high level at high school. But I think giving platforms for people to share those stories and break that silly stereotype that sometimes is still out there about Jews in sports. And I think that will really empower others, and hopefully also for parents, give them help them get excited about what their kid wants to do with sports, and understand that doesn't mean, that their Judaism is going to go by the wayside, and there's things you can proactively do to keep that involved. I mean, I'll tell you, I have memories of going to really small towns for softball tournaments, and we'd find a way to go to Friday night services.
Love it.
And it wasn't my home synagogue. Maybe it wasn't what I was used to, but that was really powerful to say, this is something we're going to try and do together. One of our Israel softball tournaments, and most of the players on the team were not particularly observant. We got wine and did Kiddush in our hotel lobby on Friday night before our games. And it was just a really special moment, and finding little moments, 5 minutes, to carve out, I think it goes a long way.
So the last question, because you're now getting a doctorate in leadership at the University of Southern California here as a Trojan Longhorns, Terrapins, it's all really coming together here. And the Lions, can't forget the Lions. But what do you see as the next big Jewish idea that we need to really be thinking about? I don't often get to speak to somebody who's getting a doctorate in leadership, really as a leader in the Jewish community and the sports world. What should we be thinking about as a Jewish community coming out of this pandemic into this new era of Judaism?
Wow, big question.
Yes.
Oh, I might want more time to think about that. I mean, I think as a Jewish community, the catchphrase from the last 2 years that we're all sick of was pivot, right? How many times did we all write pivot in emails? We're pivoting, we're changing, we're this. But I think maybe it opened us up to being a little more flexible, and moving away from the fixtures of what our organizations and institutions and big programs look like, and being more open to trying new ideas, and then what that might open up in terms of new involvement and engagement from parts of the community we haven't seen. I'm a big believer, Hillel, it's funny, I always used to say we're kind of countercultural, because in an era where so many connections are made online and social media impact of, seeing what other people are doing and kind of comparing yourself to it, that Hillel is all about those in-person communal connections. But then for a year and a half, we kind of couldn't be, and we missed it. And now we're back. And I don't think anything will replace in-person connections, but I think thinking about how we leverage technology to connect people in different parts of the world, to empower voices that might not have otherwise had a platform, I think that's all really exciting for our community. But I think the mindset, we all had to pivot and be flexible, and let's not go back to being rigid just because the pandemic's over. Let's keep some of that.
Absolutely. Maiya, it is so amazing to speak with you, to see you using technology to bring together the world of sports and faith. Maiya Edelson, Columbia University softball, first no-hitter, April 2nd, 2006, Israeli national team, Israeli Maccabiah team, director of the University of Texas Hillel Longhorns, and just an amazing, amazing person, a leader in the Jewish community, a leader in the sports world. Maiya, it's so great to see you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.